My son called to say there wasn't room for me at Thanksgiving in the sprawling new house I was co-signing for him. He and his wife expected me to quietly accept my exclusion. They will soon discover that when you remove the foundation, the entire house comes crashing down. Before we dive into this intense story, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what happens next. We'd also love to know where you're all tuning in from. Let us know in the comments. The phone rang on a Tuesday afternoon, a splash of cheerful digital noise in the otherwise silent house. For the last year since my wife Helen passed, silence had become my most constant companion. I had learned to measure my days by its texture, the soft, dusty silence of mid-morning, the heavy, expectant silence of late afternoon, and the deep, lonely silence of the night. I was in the den, sorting through a box of Helen's old teaching awards. She had been an elementary school librarian, a woman who believed a book could be a bridge to anywhere. Her picture sat on the corner of the desk, her smile as warm and comforting as the autumn sunlight filtering through the blinds. Seeing my son Mark's name flash on the screen, I smiled, too. It was a welcome interruption. "Mark, how are you, son?" I answered, my voice full of a warmth I hadn't realized I was holding in. "Hey, Dad, I'm good. Busy, you know how it is," he said. There was a familiar strain in his tone, the one he got when he was about to talk about work or money. As a junior marketing executive at a competitive firm, he was perpetually busy and perpetually stressed. "I can imagine. How's Jessica?" "She's great. Actually, she's right here. We're just running around picking up some things. Listen, the reason I'm calling, we got some fantastic news." My heart lifted. "Oh yeah, what is it?" "The final paperwork for the house came through. The bank gave the final green light. We're closing next Friday." "That's wonderful news, Mark. Truly wonderful," I said, and I meant it. The house had been their dream for over a year. A sprawling 5-bedroom colonial in a new, upscale development 30 minutes away. It was more house than two people could ever need, but it was what they wanted. It was what Jessica wanted. I knew they couldn't afford it on their own salaries, not with their student loans and car payments. When they had first shown me the listing, my jaw had dropped at the price. But then they'd asked, their faces a mixture of hope and anxiety, if I would consider co-signing the mortgage. Helen and I had worked our entire lives to be secure. We lived in the same modest 3-bedroom home for 40 years, a home we'd filled with love and paid off 15 years ago. I was a history teacher, she was a librarian. We weren't rich, but we were responsible. My retirement was stable, my credit score was perfect, and I had no debt. I was the financial rock the bank needed to see to approve a loan of that magnitude for a young couple like them. I had hesitated for a week, talking it over with Helen's photograph as if she could answer. I knew the risks. Co-signing meant their debt was my debt. If they defaulted, my retirement, my security, the very home I was sitting in would be on the line. But Mark was my only child. And in the end, the thought of his happiness, of giving him the kind of grand start in life I never had, won out over my caution. I agreed. "I knew you'd be happy for us," Mark was saying, pulling me from my thoughts. "And we're so grateful, Dad. We couldn't have done this without you." "Of course, son. Family helps family." It was a motto my own father had lived by. "Right. So, speaking of family, we were thinking, now that we'll be in the new place, we want to host our first big family Thanksgiving. You know, start our own traditions." A genuine, wide smile spread across my face. The holidays were the hardest part of being alone. Last year's Thanksgiving had been a quiet, somber affair at my house, the ghost of Helen's presence hanging over the dinner table. The thought of a loud, happy celebration in my son's new home felt like a gift. "Mark, I would love that. That sounds perfect. What can I bring?" There was a pause. It wasn't a long pause, but it was long enough for the cheerful energy of the call to curdle. I could hear Jessica whispering something to him in the background, her voice a faint, sharp hiss. "Well, that's kind of the thing, Dad," Mark said, and his voice had changed. It was hesitant, apologetic, and weak. The place is huge, obviously, but with Jessica's parents coming in from out of state and her sister's family and a few of our friends we want to impress, entertain, well, we just don't have the room for you this year. The words landed in the quiet den with the force of a physical blow. I felt the air leave my lungs. Don't have the room. The house had 5 bedrooms. It had a formal dining room, a great room, and a finished basement. It had more room than the community hall where I'd taught history for 4 decades. I stared at Helen's picture, her smiling face suddenly a painful reminder of a time when our family felt whole and unbreakable. I thought of the massive financial document sitting on my desk, the one with my name signed right next to his, the one that made their entire new place possible. "Dad, are you there?" Mark asked, his voice now laced with a nervous impatience. I cleared my throat, forcing the shock down. "I'm here, Mark," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "No, that's fine, I understand. You've got a lot on your plate. Don't you worry about me, have a wonderful time." "Oh, okay. Great," he said, the relief in his voice like a second insult. "Thanks for understanding, Dad. It'll be different next year, I promise. I've gotta run, Jessica is waving at me. I'll talk to you after the closing." The line went dead. I slowly placed the receiver back in its cradle. The silence that rushed back in wasn't soft or dusty anymore. It was cold, sharp, and absolute. I sat there for a long time, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the floor, and I could only think one thing. The betrayal was so much worse than being left alone. The hours after the phone call were a blur of hollow disbelief. I wandered through my quiet house, each room a testament to a life built on principles that suddenly felt naive. I had raised my son to value family above all else. Helen and I had taught him that loyalty wasn't a convenience but a cornerstone. Where had we gone wrong? My mind kept replaying his words. "We just don't have the room for you this year." It was such a clumsy, transparent lie. It wasn't about physical space, it was about social space. I was a retired public school teacher, a widower who lived in a modest 1970s brick rancher. I didn't fit the aesthetic. I wasn't part of the brand Jessica was so carefully curating for their new life, a life I was bankrolling. Later that evening, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Mark. "Hey Dad, just wanted to check in. Hope you're not upset. Jay and I are just really stressed with the move and want everything to be perfect for this first big event. Her parents can be a little judgmental." I read the message 3 times. The J and I felt like a corporate sign-off, and the blame shifting to Jessica's parents was cowardly. This wasn't about her parents, it was about her. And it was about my son's complete inability to stand up to her. I typed and deleted several angry responses before settling on something non-committal. "I'm fine, Mark. Focus on your move." The reply was instantaneous. "Thanks, Dad, you're the best." The condescension of that last message lit a slow-burning fuse inside me. I was the best. I was the convenient, silent partner in their ascent up a social ladder I had no interest in climbing. I was the financial tool, to be used and then stored away until needed again. I went to my desk and pulled out the thick folder from the mortgage broker. I spread the documents out under the desk lamp, the stark black ink a harsh contrast to the warm wood. My signature was there, clear and firm, on the cosigner agreement. I read the clauses I had already memorized, the ones that tied my financial fate to theirs. My assets, my home, my retirement accounts, all listed as collateral, all vulnerable. It was in that moment, staring at the legal chains I had willingly placed upon myself, that a quiet thought began to form in my mind. It was a cold, hard piece of knowledge that cut through the fog of my hurt. I had been so focused on the emotional betrayal that I had almost overlooked the practical reality of the situation. They saw me as a relic, a piece of their past they wanted to hide. But they had forgotten one crucial thing. That night I barely slept. I kept turning their decision over and over in my mind, examining it from all angles like a historian studying a flawed treaty. Was I overreacting? Was it just a thoughtless misstep by a stressed young couple? Then around midnight, I made the mistake of looking at Jessica's Instagram page. Her profile was public, a key part of her brand. Her feed was a glossy, curated fantasy of expensive brunches, boutique shopping bags, and filtered selfies with Mark. And there, in her latest post, was the confirmation I didn't know I needed. It was a picture of her and Mark clinking champagne glasses in front of a "sold" sign on the lawn of their new house. The caption read, "Making our dreams a reality. Can't wait to host the most perfect, intimate family Thanksgiving for my amazing parents and sister in our new forever home. Blessed new beginnings, family first." Family first. The hypocrisy was staggering. There in the comments was a reply from her mother. "We are so proud of you both and can't wait to celebrate. There will be so much room to relax." So much room. The lie was now no. Just spoken but published for the world to see. It wasn't a slip of the tongue. It was a premeditated, calculated exclusion. They weren't just pushing me away. They were erasing me from the picture. I closed the laptop, the faint glow of the screen vanishing to leave me in the dark. The hurt was still there, a deep, aching bruise on my heart. But now it was accompanied by something new, a cold, clear resolve. I wasn't just a sad old man to be pitied or discarded. I was the cosigner. I was the foundation. They had forgotten one crucial thing, I thought again, but this time it wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, and I knew exactly what I had to do. To understand the depth of the wound, you have to understand the family Helen and I built, or at least the one we thought we'd built. We weren't people of grand gestures. Our love was in the daily details. The packed lunches, the help with homework, the scraped knees kissed better, the unwavering presence on the sidelines of every soccer game and school play. Mark was our world, and we poured everything we had into him, not just our money, but our time, our values, our very selves. I remember when he wanted to go to an out-of-state university, one with a tuition that made us dizzy. I took on a second job teaching night classes in American government at the local community college. Helen started a weekend book club for kids at her library for a small fee. We never told Mark about the extra work. We just told him we'd make it work, and we did. When he graduated, we beamed with a pride that felt infinite. We saw his diploma not just as his achievement, but as the culmination of our shared family dream. Thanksgiving was always Helen's favorite holiday. Our small house would overflow with the smell of her sage and onion stuffing and the sound of laughter. She would set the table with her grandmother's china, telling stories about each crack and chip. For Helen, Thanksgiving wasn't about performance. It was about presence. It was about squeezing one more chair around the table, about making everyone feel not just welcome, but essential. "There's always room, Larry," she'd say with a wink if an unexpected neighbor or a friend of Mark's showed up. "We just add another leaf to the table and another story to the evening." After she was gone, I tried to keep that spirit alive. I knew I couldn't replicate her magic, but I could honor her memory. That's why the thought of a big Thanksgiving at Mark's new house had meant so much. It felt like a passing of the torch, a continuation of Helen's legacy of love and inclusion. Then came Jessica. Mark met her at a marketing conference 2 years ago. From the moment he introduced us, I felt a subtle, unnerving friction. She was polished, beautiful, and immaculately put together. She spoke in a language of brands, analytics, and personal growth that felt alien to me. She looked around our comfortable, lived-in home with a polite, vacant smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I could feel her cataloging the worn armchair, the slightly dated wallpaper, the bookshelves overflowing with history tomes instead of curated decorative objects. "Your dad has so many books," she'd said to Mark, as if I weren't in the room. "He's a history teacher, Jess." Or was, Mark had replied with an awkward laugh. "Right, of course. So charming," she'd said, the word charming sounding like a clinical diagnosis for something quaint and irrelevant. Over time, her influence on Mark became increasingly apparent. He started dressing differently, in sharper, more expensive clothes that seemed to wear him more than he wore them. He talked less about his passions and more about his career trajectory. He began to gently mock the things he used to love, like our annual camping trips, calling them rustic with an apologetic smile. The first time Jessica made a pointed comment about my finances was last Christmas. We were at their apartment, and she was showing me photos on her tablet of the gated community where they hoped to buy. The property values are just incredible, she'd gushed. It's all about the investment, you know. You can't just let money sit around, Larry. You have to make it work for you. I'd simply nodded. Your mother and I believed in a different kind of investment, Jessica. We put our money in our son's education. She gave a tight, bright smile. Of course, and that was a wonderful foundation. But now it's time for phase two, right? Leveraging assets for growth. I saw then that she viewed me not as a person, but as an unleveraged asset. My paid-off house, my stable retirement fund, my perfect credit, they weren't the symbols of a life well lived. They were dormant capital waiting to be activated. When they asked me to co-sign, I saw the triumphant gleam in her eyes. It was the look of a strategist who had just successfully acquired a key resource. Mark, on the other hand, just looked relieved, as if he'd managed to please her and secure the prize she so desperately wanted. Against my better judgment, I pushed my reservations aside, telling myself that I was doing this for my son, for the boy I'd taught to ride a bike in our driveway. I was helping him build his future. Now, sitting in the silence of my den, I understood. I hadn't been helping him build his future. I had merely been providing the raw materials for Jessica to construct hers, and in her perfectly designed, aesthetically pleasing new world, there was no place for the quarry from which the stone was taken. The morning after Jessica's Instagram post, the sun rose on a world that felt different. The grief and shock that had paralyzed me were still present, but they had receded, making way for a cold, hard clarity. I was no longer a victim of my son's weakness. I was a man with a decision to make. My years of teaching history had taught me one thing: passivity in the face of injustice is a form of complicity. I would not be complicit in my own erasure. I made a pot of coffee, the familiar ritual grounding me. As it brewed, I walked over to the large oak filing cabinet in the corner of my den. It was a relic from my classroom, a sturdy piece of furniture that held 40 years of my life. I pulled open the bottom drawer, the one marked Financial, and retrieved the thick accordion-style folder labeled Home. Inside, nestled amongst old property tax receipts and insurance policies, was the mortgage application packet. I wasn't investigating a crime in the traditional sense. I didn't need a private eye to tell me who Jessica was. She advertised it to the world daily. My investigation was simpler, quieter, and far more potent. It was an audit of the agreement that bound me to them. I spent the next hour at my desk, reading every line of the cosigner agreement with the meticulous focus of a historian examining a primary source document. I wasn't looking for a loophole to escape my obligation. I was looking for a clear understanding of my power within it. And there it was, in plain English. The bank's approval of the loan was not just influenced by my participation, it was conditional upon it. The loan officer, a man I'd never met, had based his entire risk assessment on L. Miller's extensive positive credit history, low debt-to-income ratio, and significant unencumbered assets. Mark and Jessica, on their own, were considered a high-risk loan. With me, they were a blue-chip investment. My leverage wasn't just a vague threat. It was the entire linchpin of the deal. The agreement was clear. If any of the primary conditions of the loan changed prior to closing, the bank reserved the right to nullify the offer. My withdrawal would not be a minor change. It would be a seismic event. The knowledge was empowering. The trap wasn't something I had to build. It was already there, woven into the very fabric of their ambition. All I had to do was spring it. My hand hovered over the phone. My heart hammered against my ribs. This wasn't just a financial transaction. This was a definitive statement. It was the drawing of a line that could never be undrawn. I thought of Helen, of her belief in forgiveness and family. Would she approve? But then I thought of her other core belief, self-respect. Helen had never tolerated being treated as a doormat, and she wouldn't want me to be one either. I picked up the phone and dialed the number for my local bank branch, the one I had used for over 40 years. I asked to speak to the manager, Frank Gable. Frank wasn't some anonymous voice in a call center. He was a man I knew. His kids had been my students. We served on a town committee together. "Larry, good to hear from you," Frank's voice boomed over the line. "Don't tell me you're finally ready to take that trip to see the battlefields of Normandy you're always talking about." "Not just yet, Frank. I'm calling about something a bit more urgent," I said, my voice calm and measured. "It's about a mortgage application I've co-signed for my son, Mark Miller. The closing is scheduled for next Friday." "Ah, yes, the big one. Congratulations, that's a beautiful development out there. A great investment." "About that," I said, taking a steadying breath. "Frank, I need to formally withdraw my position as co-signer on that application, effective immediately." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. Frank, a man who dealt with financial shocks daily, was speechless. "Larry, did I hear you correctly? You're pulling out. The closing is in 8 days." "You heard me correctly," I affirmed. "Personal family circumstances have changed, and I am no longer willing or able to provide financial backing for this purchase." "Larry, I have to advise you, this will kill the deal. There is no way Mark and his wife will qualify on their own. They'll almost certainly lose their earnest money deposit. We're talking about a significant amount of money." "I am aware of the consequences, Frank," I said, the words tasting like iron. "That is my final decision." I could hear the clacking of a keyboard as Frank processed the information. "Okay, Larry, as your banker I'm concerned. As your friend I have to ask, are you sure about this? Is everything okay?" The note of genuine concern in his voice almost broke my resolve. But then the image of Jessica's smug, filtered smile flashed in my mind. "Everything is clearer than it has been in a long time," I said. "I need you to handle this officially, Frank. Please notify the mortgage underwriting department today. And when my son calls, as I'm sure he will, you have my permission to inform him that the withdrawal was at my direct request." "All right, Larry," Frank said, his voice now all business. "I'll put it through. The system will likely generate an automated notification to them by tomorrow morning." "Thank you, Frank. I appreciate your discretion." I hung up the phone. A profound sense of quiet settled over me. There was no triumph, no elation, just the heavy, somber feeling of a door being closed and locked. The trap was set. Now all I had to do was wait for the sound of it snapping shut. The day after my call with Frank was one of the longest of my life. I moved through my day on autopilot, trying to distract myself with chores. I tidied the garage, pruned the rose bushes Helen had planted, and attempted to read, but the same paragraph swam before my eyes again and again. Every time the phone rang, my stomach clenched. It was a telemarketer, then my sister calling from Florida for our weekly chat. I feigned normalcy, my voice a hollow echo of my usual self. The waiting was a form of internal confrontation. With every passing hour, I second-guessed my decision. Was it too harsh? Was I destroying my relationship with my only son over a single, stupid insult? I felt like a general in the agonizing silence between launching an attack and receiving the first battlefield reports. My resolve began to waver in the late afternoon. Perhaps I should call Frank back, reverse the decision, and just swallow my pride. I could endure a lonely Thanksgiving. I could tolerate being a peripheral figure in their new life. The alternative, a permanent rift, a son who might hate me, felt unimaginably painful. It was in that moment of weakness that I found myself, against my better judgment, drawn back to Jessica's Instagram page. It was like probing a sore tooth, a self-destructive impulse to confirm the source of the pain. She had posted a new story, a series of short video clips that disappeared after 24 hours. The first clip was a boomerang of her holding up a set of shiny new keys, presumably from the final walkthrough of the house. The next was a shot of her phone screen, showing a calendar entry for the following Friday, closing day, with champagne bottle emojis. But it was the third clip that solidified my wavering conviction into granite. It was a video, filmed by Mark, of Jessica walking through the cavernous, empty dining room of the new house. She twirled, her arms outstretched. "Okay, so," she said, her voice echoing slightly in the unfurnished space, "this is where the main table will go. It seats 12. Perfect for Mom, Dad, my sister's family, and our other guests. And Larry." Mark's voice from behind the camera was tentative. "What about Dad?" Jessica stopped twirling and looked directly at the camera, at Mark, a look of mild annoyance on her face. Mark, we talked about this. He can come for Christmas. Thanksgiving is our aesthetic. My parents, my friends, it's a specific vibe. You know how he gets, telling all those old war stories. It's just not the look." She then waved her hand dismissively. "Anyway, we'll put the kids' table over here by the window." The casual cruelty, the reduction of my entire existence to an aesthetic and a vibe, was breathtaking. She hadn't just uninvited me. She had belittled and caricatured me to my own son. And he had stood there, filming it, a silent participant in his father's humiliation. I closed the laptop, my hands trembling not with weakness but with a surge of cold anger. The doubt was gone, incinerated by the heat of her contempt. My decision was no longer just a reaction to being excluded. It was a defense of my own dignity, a stand for the memory of the life Helen and I had built. They weren't just taking my money. They were trying to take my worth. The phone remained silent for the rest of the evening. The official notification from the bank must have been sent. I imagined it sitting in Mark's inbox, an unread email that held the demolition order for his dreams. I pictured him and Jessica celebrating, oblivious, talking about furniture and guest lists, completely unaware of the financial ground crumbling beneath their feet. The first confrontation wasn't going to be a shouting match or a tearful plea. It was going to be the cold, impersonal finality of a banker's letter. It was the quiet, devastating consequence of an action they never thought would have won. My reveal wouldn't be a dramatic speech. It would be the sudden, stark reality they would wake up to. And as I turned off the lights and prepared for another sleepless night, I knew with absolute certainty that I had done the right thing. The call came the next morning at precisely 9:15 a.m. I was sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee, watching the squirrels chase each other in the backyard, when the phone buzzed violently against the wood. It was Mark. I let it ring 3 times before answering, composing myself, channeling the calm demeanor of a teacher about to handle a difficult student. "Hello, Mark," I said quietly. "Dad, what did you do?" His voice was a frantic, high-pitched squeak of pure panic. There was no greeting, no preamble, just raw accusation. In the background, I could hear Jessica wailing, a dramatic, escalating cry of distress. "I'm not sure what you mean," I replied, my voice even. "Don't play dumb. The bank, we got an email, an official notice. It says the loan agreement has been terminated because the cosigner withdrew. It says you withdrew. Why would you do that? The closing is next week. We're going to lose the house. We're going to lose our deposit." He was rambling, the words tumbling over one another in a torrent of disbelief and fury. The case I was building wasn't a legal one but a moral one, and his immediate, entitled anger was my first piece of evidence. There was no apology in his voice, no hint of introspection. He wasn't asking why I might be hurt. He was demanding to know why I had sabotaged him. "I did what I felt was necessary, Mark," I said calmly. "Necessary? Necessary for what? To ruin our lives? Jessica is a mess. This was everything to us, after all we've done to get here." "And what is it you've done exactly?" I asked, the question sharp and pointed. "What have you contributed to this deal besides your ambition?" There was a sputtering silence. We found the house. We put in the offer. We've been working with the realtor for a year. And I put my entire financial future on the line to make it possible, I countered, my voice still quiet but gaining an edge of steel. A future I built over 40 years of hard work, a future your mother and I built together. It seems to me that a man who is providing the entire foundation for a house should at least be guaranteed a seat at the table. I could hear Jessica snatch the phone from him. "Larry, you can't do this," she shrieked, her voice stripped of its usual polished charm. "This is unbelievably selfish. You are a vindictive, horrible old man. Do you know how this makes us look? We've told everyone about this house." "Ah, yes, the look of things," I said. "You're aesthetic. I saw your video, Jessica. The one where you explained so clearly that I didn't fit the vibe for your perfect Thanksgiving. The one where my own son filmed you mocking me." Her breath hitched, she was caught. That was a private conversation. You had no right. "And you had no right to use me," I shot back. "You had no right to take my life's work, my security, and my trust, and treat it like your personal line of credit, only to discard me like an unfashionable piece of furniture once you had what you wanted. That, Jessica, is what's truly horrible." I heard a muffled sob, and then Mark was back on the line, his voice now pleading. "Dad, please, it was a stupid mistake. She didn't mean it. We were stressed. Just call the bank back. We can fix this. Please, Dad, I'm begging you." This was the moment of truth. This was where the case would be won or lost. His apology was weak, prompted by desperation, not sincerity. He was sorry they got caught, sorry their dream was imploding. He still wasn't sorry for the original act of cruelty. He was still defending her. "No, Mark," I said, and my voice was final. It held the weight of my grief for Helen, my love for the son he used to be, and my profound disappointment in the man he had become. "There is nothing to fix. A co-signature on a loan is a legal symbol of trust. You and your wife have shown me that you are not trustworthy. You don't get to break the foundation and still expect the house to stand. The decision is made. You two need to learn what it means to build something on your own." I didn't wait for a reply. I ended the call and placed the phone back on the table. The house was utterly silent. There were no shouts, no wails, just the quiet ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. The stakes had been escalated, the confrontation had happened, and the truth had been laid bare. They had presented their case, based on entitlement and image, and I had presented mine, based on dignity and self-respect. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, whose case was stronger. 2 days of silence followed the explosive pho. Nicole. I imagined it was a period of frantic activity for them, desperate calls to the mortgage broker, fruitless appeals to the bank, and the slow, horrifying realization that the walls were well and truly closing in. I felt a pang of sadness for my son, for the harsh lesson he was learning, but it was overshadowed by a firm belief in its necessity. They showed up on Saturday morning. I was in the front yard, raking the last of the autumn leaves when their car, a luxury sedan I knew they were struggling to afford, pulled up to the curb. They got out, and their appearance was a stark contrast to their usual polished selves. Mark's face was pale and drawn, with dark circles under his eyes. Jessica's expensive clothes looked rumpled, and her makeup couldn't hide the redness around her eyes. They looked defeated. They walked up my driveway, stopping a few feet away from me on the lawn. For a moment, nobody spoke. The only sound was the rustle of the leaves as I leaned the rake against the oak tree. "Dad," Mark began, his voice barely a whisper. We needed to talk to you, in person." I crossed my arms, my stance neither welcoming nor aggressive. I was simply a man on his own property, waiting. "I'm listening." Jessica stepped forward, attempting to conjure one of her bright, persuasive smiles, but it flickered and died on her lips. It was like a faulty light bulb. "Larry," she began, her voice strained with false sweetness, "we have been acting like complete fools. We were arrogant and we were cruel, and there is no excuse for how we treated you. We are so sorry." It was a well-rehearsed speech, but it lacked the conviction of genuine remorse. It was the plea of a cornered animal, not the confession of a changed heart. "We lost the house, Larry," Jessica continued, her voice cracking as she switched tactics to pathos. "And the deposit, $20,000, it's gone. It was everything we had saved." I remained silent, my expression unchanging. Mark stepped forward, his eyes pleading with mine. "Dad, it's not just the money, I know I messed up. I let things get out of hand. I was weak. I should have stood up for you. You're my father. I never should have let that happen." This, at least, felt real. The shame in his eyes was genuine, but it was followed by the inevitable pivot. "But we can still fix this," he said, his voice gaining a desperate urgency. "The developer is willing to give us a 48-hour extension if we can secure new financing. We found another bank, a credit union, but they need an even bigger commitment from a cosigner because we're a new client. Dad, if you would just reconsider, we've learned our lesson. We swear it. We'll have you over for Thanksgiving, Christmas, every holiday. We'll do anything." This was the showdown, not in a public place but here on the sacred ground of my home, the home where I had raised him. They weren't here to apologize, they were here to transact. They were offering conditional love in exchange for my signature. I took a slow breath, the crisp autumn air filling my lungs. I looked from my son's desperate face to his wife's tear-streaked, manipulative one, and I felt a profound sense of calm. The power they thought they had over me, my love for my son, was still there, but it was no longer a weakness they could exploit. "No," I said. The word was quiet, but it landed with the finality of a gavel. Jessica gasped. "No, after we just apologized, after we told you we'd lose everything." "Your apology is not an apology," I said, looking directly at her. "It is a negotiation. You are sorry for the consequences, not for the actions. You learned nothing except that your aesthetic comes with a price tag you can't afford." I then turned my full attention to my son. "And you, Mark," I said, my voice softening slightly with a deep paternal sorrow. "You speak of lessons learned, but what lesson is it? That you should be nicer to your father when you need his money. The lesson you needed to learn was about loyalty, about integrity, about standing up for your family, not because you might get something out of it, but because it's the right thing to do. You failed that test." I walked over to the rake and picked it up. "The bank didn't take your house. Your own choices did. You wanted to build a life on a foundation of image and exclusion. Real life, a real family, is built on trust and respect. You shattered that trust, so you don't get to use my respectability to finance your fantasy any longer." I gestured toward their car with the handle of the rake. "The decision is final. I will not co-sign that loan or any other. You will have to find your own way. Now I have leaves to rake. I think it's time for you to go." Mark stared at me, his mouth agape, the finality of my words finally sinking in. For the first time, he seemed to see me not as Dad, the endless resource, but as Larry Miller, a man with his own limits and his own self-worth. Jessica just stared, her face a mask of incandescent fury. Her plan had failed. The asset had refused to be leveraged. Without another word, they turned. Their walk back to the car was a walk of shame. The engine started and they drove away, leaving me alone in the quiet of my yard. I watched them go, not with anger or triumph, but with a heavy heart and a clear conscience. The house of cards they had so proudly constructed had fallen, and they had no one to blame but themselves. The week leading up to Thanksgiving was quieter than I had anticipated. There were no more calls, no more texts, no more surprise visits. It was as if a storm had passed, leaving behind a clean, calm, and irrevocably altered landscape. The initial turmoil in my heart had settled into a kind of peaceful melancholy. I mourned the relationship I thought I had with my son, but I felt a renewed sense of my own strength. I had chosen dignity over convenience, and that was a victory in itself. On Thanksgiving morning, I woke to the smell of my own coffee brewing, not the scent of a turkey roasting. The house was silent. For a moment, a wave of loneliness washed over me. This was the day I was supposed to have been cast aside, the day my exclusion was to have been made official. But instead of succumbing to the feeling, I made a different choice. I called my old friend and former colleague Dave, whose children were grown and lived across the country. "Dave," I said, "Larry Miller here. I was wondering what a couple of old bachelors like us are doing for Thanksgiving." An hour later, I was at Dave's house, along with two other retired teachers from our old lunch group. We didn't have a grand feast. We had a store-bought roasted chicken, some instant mashed potatoes, and a football game on the television. We talked about history, about our former students, about the aches and pains of getting older. We told the same old stories we always did, the ones Jessica would have found so painfully out of style. And I laughed. It was a real, genuine laugh that came from the gut. Surrounded by people who knew me, who valued me for who I was, I did not feel like a discarded relic. I felt at home. Late that afternoon, as I was driving back to my house, I passed the entrance to the upscale development where Mark and Jessica's house was supposed to have been. On a whim, I turned in. I drove down the pristine, winding streets until I found the lot. The Colonial stood there, magnificent and empty. A new for sale sign was staked into the immaculate lawn. It was just a house. A beautiful, empty shell, stripped of the dreams and ambitions that had been projected onto it. It held no power. When I got home, there was a single envelope in my mailbox. It was plain white, with my name written on the front in Mark's familiar scrawl. I took it inside and sat at my desk, Helen's picture watching me, before I opened it. It wasn't a card. It was a letter several pages long. "Dad," it began. "I don't know how to start this. I'm sorry, feels too small for what I did. I have spent the last week in the guest room of Jessica's parents' house, listening to her cry and her parents tell me what a failure I am. And the worst part is they're right. I failed. I failed as a husband because I couldn't give my wife the life she wanted. But that's not the failure that keeps me up at night. I failed as a son. I let myself be convinced that you were an obstacle to my happiness when you have only ever been the source of it. I traded your unconditional love for her conditional approval, and I lost them both. Jessica and I are separating. The fight about the house wasn't the cause, it was just the thing that revealed how broken we already were. She cared more about the image of a life than the life itself, and I let her. I remember when Mom was sick. You never left her side. You taught your classes, you came home, you took care of her, you took care of me. You never once complained. You just did what a man, a husband, and a father does. You showed up. And when it was my turn to show up for you, I didn't just stay home. I locked the door. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't deserve it. And I am not asking for anything. I will get a small apartment. I will find a way to pay back Jessica's parents for the lost deposit, and I will stand on my own 2 feet. It's what you and Mom always taught me to do. I just somehow forgot how. I just wanted you to know that I see it now, all of it. I am so sorry, Dad. Your son, Mark." I folded the letter and placed it on the desk next to Helen's picture. Tears welled in my eyes, not tears of anger or sadness, but of a painful, complicated hope. The path to reconciliation would be long and difficult, built on new foundations of trust that he would have to lay, brick by brick. But for the first time in a long time, I saw the boy I raised again. I looked out the window as the sun began to set, casting a warm gold in light across my yard. The house was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet now. It was the peaceful silence of a man secure in his own home, in his own worth. Justice had been served, not through vengeance, but through the simple, unwavering act of respecting myself. And in that quiet, I felt a sense of peace.